Okay, hello there. It's Paul Green from the business community. We're doing another one of our regular Spotlight on interviews. And today I'm pleased to say I'm joined by Dr. AJ Yates. Good morning, AJ.
Morning.
So we're going to pick his brains a little bit and find out a little bit about how he's come to be where he is today. And then a little bit later, he's going to do a little bit of a sort of 3 to 4 minute solo performance and just sort of like talk to us about a particular issue in the sort of like mental health arena. So look forward to that a little bit later. So do you just want to introduce yourself, AJ, and let people know who you are and what you do?
Yes, thank you for that. So I'm Dr. AJ, company, as you can see on the bottom, is AJ Limited, and I teach mental health courses, so mental health awareness courses and mental health first aid courses, either in company for businesses or open courses for businesses or individuals to attend. And I have a couple of other roles as well, one of which is I teach physical first aid for the local charity Milton Keynes Safety Centre, commonly known as Hazard Alley, and I do their courses there for them when we're allowed to, which in the middle of the pandemic is a little bit more tricky. But we have the mental health courses are now available online, which has been a big help in the current climate.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I think it's very difficult to do anything physical in these times, isn't it? So how did you get to where you are today then? What was your journey that had you in this particular field?
Yeah, it was a bit of a circuitous route, really. When I was young, I was told that I joined St John Ambulance for a number of reasons. One being that I had a friend in St John, one being that I think I was told that women go for men in uniform. So I thought, all right, okay, but I've got an organised, yeah. See, you're laughing, which just like lets you know that there are different types of uniforms that women go for, and I don't know which is the best one, but I know that St John isn't it. But spent more than 4 decades going out at weekends, putting on the sexy outfits, touting for business, so standing in fields and waiting for people to fall off of things. So very much a kind of a physical first aid background, and through that I came into training and taught first aid for St John Ambulance. And then some years ago, and it's not been in the country that long, it's only just over a decade that mental health first aid has been a thing in this country. Mental Health First Aid England was set up as a community interest company, and when I found out about that, I was like, ooh, that sounds quite interesting. And maybe it's something that we should do. And I had an academic background in that area as well. Again, a very circuitous route. I had what Frank Skinner calls an intellectual midlife crisis, and my wife now calls an intellectual midlife crisis, where I thought I should get an education. So I did an undergraduate degree in herbal medicine, which was very interesting. But my master's was in medical anthropology, which is kind of cultural and social views of health and illness. And that kind of sideways step into the social sciences meant I had the opportunity to do my PhD, which was based around medical sociology and investigated women's lived experience of distress. So when women experience distress, what was that experience like for them, and what did they do to try and recover from their distress, especially if they felt their GP didn't have the answer and they looked at complementary therapies, self-care and those sorts of things. So that interest in that aspect of mental health combined with my training in first aid meant that when mental health first aid came along, it seemed an obvious route to go into. And so I was one of the first cohorts that St John Ambulance sent to be trained. And once I'd done that, I thought, I quite like doing this. Maybe I should do it on my own, and so I set up AJ Limited, and which is why I'm here.
So how long? When did you set up AJ? How long have you been doing that?
It's just come up to 3 years, which has been an interesting 3 years. COVID-19 wasn't part of the business plan when I first started, but in terms of work-life balance, there is a lot to be said for having your own business. But like every business owner knows, there's pluses and minuses. But yeah, I've not regretted the decision.
So I think you just sort of said that mental health sort of issues have only really come into the fore in the last sort of like decade. Why do you think that is? What's had it be more people be more aware of mental health issues?
Well, I mean, traditionally, it's something that we've not spoken about very much. It's certainly something that we're getting better at speaking about. And we've noticed that on the mental health first aid courses, one of the exercises near the start of the course is just to ask the delegates, what does mental health mean to them? And when I first started teaching mental health first aid, invariably the delegates would go off into breakout rooms or into little groups, and they would start talking about depression and anxiety and maybe some of the other mental illnesses they'd heard of. But that wasn't the question. It wasn't what does mental illness mean to you? What does mental health mean to you? But they immediately focused on the negative aspect of mental health. Whereas these days, if I ask the question, generally people do talk about it. It's the way they feel, it's the way they cope with stresses of everyday life, and it's what they do to stay mentally healthy, which is a much more positive way of looking at it. So we are getting better at reducing that stigma, but it's just traditionally something we've not really spoken about. And when you consider that I teach first aid at work, and the First Aid at Work, etc. Act came out in 1974, then you can see that there's still a lot of catching up to do. And obviously we're used to first aid being mandatory in the workplace, whereas mental health first aid isn't as yet, although that is likely to change at some point in the future.
So as we're recording this, we're in lockdown 3.0, I guess we would call it now. So obviously it's been quite a traumatic time for most, I guess, because I don't think anybody thought it would last this long, you know, when we originally went into lockdown back in spring last year. What are your thoughts on the impact that it'll have on people's mental health, given the current climate?
Yeah, there's definitely the potential for it to have a negative impact on people's well-being. But everybody's an individual, and for me, it's been quite interesting because our girl sort of moved back home between lockdowns last year, and being a young person, and quite often people think of young people as being quite mentally resilient. But in a way, the lockdowns had much more of an impact on her because essentially she has a life, whereas I don't. And you can give me a cup of tea and flick me down in front of Strictly, and I'll be quite happy. Whereas when you're used to going out and seeing friends and meeting up, then it's a much bigger change to your everyday life. But some people, you know, are quite happy from working from home. They like the feeling of security and the fact they don't have to go out. But some people do miss going into an office. They miss that kind of social network. And so it's very variable, but certainly there's definitely the potential, the more isolated you are, for it to have a negative impact on your well-being, and is certainly something that businesses and business owners need to be aware of.
So have you had to adapt your business model then? Because I guess the first aid courses, the mental first aid courses you were doing were in the physical world. Have you moved those online? How has that been for you?
Yeah, and it's been a bit of a steep learning curve. I was in the fortunate position that because the business was so new, I had what I believe is known as a portfolio CV. So I had a couple of other income streams. So I had the physical first aid teaching, I had the mental health courses, but I also worked 2 days a week for a charity at the College of Medicine. And in doing so, it meant that there was an alternative income stream that kept me sane and solvent through that first lockdown. Because you're right, the courses I was teaching all dried up and just couldn't be run at all. So as the restrictions have eased, then some of the first aid training has been able to go ahead, and given their due, they've been brilliant at making a safe space for people to have their training. But Mental Health First Aid England saw the issue and immediately put a lot of effort into transferring the mental health courses into the online sphere, which again has been a challenge for something new, and is something very different. But I think we're all getting used to working virtually and online now, and they are a brilliant resource to have. And the fact that people can still learn about or mental health awareness and how to support someone that's struggling with their mental health from the comfort of their own home has been a really bonus throughout the pandemic.
Okay, and in terms of your a typical client for you, you know, who are you looking to reach? Who are you looking to sort of like help with the sort of services you provide?
I mean, it's true that we all have mental health, and there is no health without mental health. And because of that, at any stage, any one of us could become mentally unwell. So the businesses that normally would come to me are the ones that have maybe identified that there is an issue around mental health. Sometimes it concerns an individual member of staff that highlights the issue. Sometimes it's just a general feeling of the fact that they should be supporting mental health in the workplace, but maybe aren't quite sure of where to start. And sometimes it's the larger companies. So what they do is, because they are very aware of their their need to support well-being in the workplace, they sign up to mental health training. But sometimes it's the smaller companies, and the fact that maybe the CEO knows everybody individually, knows what struggles they're going through, and feels maybe more of a connection with the workforce, and they quite often want to support the well-being of the workers as well. So they come to me, and there's a few different routes. There are a few different courses, from a 4-hour introduction to mental health awareness through to the equivalent of the 2-day, which currently is being run as 4 live sessions online with some individual learning, which is the 2-day mental health first aid course. And the Mental Health First Aid England have just released an online mental health first aid champion, which is the equivalent of the 1-day course. But I also do a half-hour introductory session, so either online or going into companies if they wanted just to have a bit of a PowerPoint and a chat about what is mental health, why is it important in the workplace, and what they can do to help support that. Then I think it's important because a lot of owners or businesses, they have a desire to support mental health and well-being, but it's very new to them and they don't really know where to start. So if I can point them in the right direction, then that's all to the good.
One thing that I think you're very skillful at, when I've seen you do your sort of networking introductions, is bringing humour into it. And I know it's a serious subject, but I think, what are your thoughts on that? You've obviously put some thought behind the sort of like 45-second intros that you do, and to my view, that's helped you be engaging, and people have probably learned more about mental health by the way you approach it than maybe just being sort of like quite straight-laced about it. So obviously my view is that you put some thought into those things. So how do you go about doing that and coming up with something creative to do for your 45-second introduction?
I mean, the 45-second introduction, I've no idea where those things come from. I'll just wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, maybe I could do this. But in terms of the training, the more you do it, the more you get used to where there's an option to introduce some humour. And we've always done that with the physical first aid training, and anyone that's been on a first aid course with a trainer that's worth their salt would know that generally you're there for a day or two or however long. And I feel that I would have failed as a trainer if you don't come away having had a bit of a chuckle, because it can be a dark subject, and we know that the emergency services have a very sort of like dark humour, because they need coping strategies for the type of jobs that they do, and humour is one of the ways of releasing that safety valve, as it were. And with the mental health first aid, it's true that some of the topics that we discuss are quite dark topics to discuss and not normally discussed, like eating disorders or self-harm or suicide. But it's not so much that we are making light of those topics and that we are having a laugh about suicide, because it affects so many people in such tragic circumstances that it's not something to be taken lightly. But it is true that when you are interacting with people, we can still like have that. I only said the word banter then, which I absolutely hate some, so I've said it. But you can still have that interaction, and you can still have a bit of a chuckle. But quite often it's round about the course, and self-deprecating humour for me, I think is quite a good way of approaching courses, because if I poke fun at myself, then I'm not singling anybody out, but people then kind of get the vibe that they can join in, and generally do join in, and then start taking the mick out of me as well, which is absolutely fine.
Yeah, I think humour has been very important, particularly in the last 9 months more so, because I think people need a bit of a laugh and a bit of cheering up, don't they? It's sometimes hard to do on platforms like this. You mentioned banter. Banter's quite hard to do on Zoom and platforms like that, because you just don't get that interaction that you get in the physical world. But yeah, I think humour is an important aspect. So I talk about people's sort of like why, what gets you out of bed in the morning, what drives you. What would you say is your why?
It's the fact that I'm very fortunate in the fact that I love what I do. I enjoy teaching. I enjoy the interaction, and I am quite passionate about the things I teach. So I wouldn't start to teach something that I wasn't passionate about or didn't feel that I had a lot of knowledge about, because I hate kind of being chucked in the deep end and talking about something that I don't feel confident about. And I think that comes across. But having done so many years in St John dealing with physical and mental health issues as well, I see the impact that these things have, and why for example, first aid isn't taught in schools as a mandatory thing is beyond me. Lots of schools will do that now, but they don't have to. And yet I've taught first aid to school children who love it. They love rolling around on the floor with each other. And if you can get them at age 9 and teach them the recovery position, it kind of sticks. And they will remember that 20 years later, which is just brilliant. But also mental health, the fact that we all have the mental health, and the fact that we can all struggle with our mental health at some point, but traditionally we're not spoken about it. And you know, the biggest thing is reaching out and getting help. That's the hardest step, and there are lots of barriers to people doing that. But if we can reduce the stigma, then people are more likely to seek help sooner. And for businesses, I mean, that's really where one of the reasons why a lot of businesses will invest in mental health training is because it saves them money. Because if they have staff who are more mentally resilient and will speak out when they need help, then their levels of absenteeism go down, presenteeism go down, staff turnover goes down, and they save money by having a more mentally resilient workforce. So, you know, there are lots of benefits financially, but having seen the impact on individuals and those around them, you know, if somebody takes their own life, it's not just the person that's affected, it's the family, it's the friends, it's the colleagues, and in many cases will also feel personally responsible that maybe they should have spotted something, they should have done something to help. And so those are the sorts of things that we discuss on the courses.
Yes, it's a ripple effect, isn't it? It just doesn't affect people that are surrounded. So if people are feeling like they're struggling mentally at the moment, what sort of resources are out there for people? Are the sort of places that they can go online, or what would you say to people? You know, where should they start if they're struggling a little bit at the moment?
Yeah, it's interesting that it's the sort of thing that we discuss on the courses, because there are lots of resources there. And as, for example, as a mental health first aider, your role is not to diagnose mental health conditions, because we know there are all different types of conditions out there. And psychologists and psychiatrists will discuss the traits that will make someone have a particular condition compared to someone else. And there's a lot of discussion. So we're not expected to be able to diagnose mental illness, but mental health first aiders can recognise when someone's in distress. So having these people trained is useful because they can start to have conversations with someone that maybe doesn't want to open up. But another role of the mental health first aid is to signpost to resources, because they're not given advice, they're not going to cure the problem, but it's having those conversations and encouraging people and helping people to seek assistance. So in terms of seeking assistance, then quite often the GP is the first port of call, because I think we can all appreciate them, you know, like we always do, but particularly now, we are incredibly fortunate to have the National Health Service. They are an amazing bunch of people doing an amazing job. And your GP is really important because they can do a general health screen and look for both physical and mental issues, and can either help in terms of treatment or refer on to specialists. But there are also other things you can do. There are lots of fantastic charities out there that people can talk to if they're starting to struggle with how they're feeling. Samaritans obviously is one that springs to mind. And you don't have to be absolutely feeling desperate and wanting to take your own life to phone the Samaritans. They would much rather you talk to them when you're starting to feel low and be able to support you so that you don't get to a crisis point, rather than you actually get to that point. But also there's something now where people can just go online and they can just Google IAPT and where they live, because improving access to psychological therapies, so IAPT, is designed to help people self-refer. So if you Google IAPT and where you live, then it will just bring up a list of people that are there to support people in terms of mental health, and you can self-refer. But also businesses as well. Many businesses will have an employee assistance program, and most employee assistance programs will have some sort of free, at the point of use, confidential support line. And so what I always say to people when they come on the courses is, if you want to reduce stigma, it's a really good time to go back and say, oh, you know, so I wasn't in the office yesterday. This is what I was doing. This is the course that I did, and this is what I mean. This is what it means to be mentally aware. And we did it because, as a business, we support mental health. We don't just have these people doing the training. We also have, and then they list the resources that quite often are available, but people forget about, because you get told about the employee assistance program on your induction day. But when I start a business, I just want to know when my lunch break is. and maybe where the toilets are. And if I'm feeling sort of really professional, then where's the fire exit? And generally everything else goes over my head. So again, for employers, it's just reminding them to remind everybody else that they may well have resources that are available that people can use, and don't even have to tell their employer about it.
So I guess the message is, there are resources available. People have just got to reach out and sort of see what's there to help them. You've probably got competitors in your field. There's probably other people working in this area. Well, what would you say makes you different from your competitors? What has you stand out?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because the mental health courses I teach are all written and validated by Mental Health First Aid England. So like I said, they're the community interest company that writes these courses, does all the certification for the courses, and then trains trainers to go out and teach it. Obviously, I'm one of those trainers. So there are lots of people out there, but I think it's partly my training background, because I spent so much time stood in front of people, chatting away, having a bit of a laugh and getting information across. Also, my doctoral research was really important, because you've got the core material in the course, which is fine, but having people's stories that you can use to illustrate the points is really powerful. So that's something I'm very keen, if people were happy to do so when they come on the course, is to find out their experiences. So of course, talk about confidentiality, and what's mentioned on the course stays on the course. But if someone has experience, or either personally or someone they know, for example, having an eating disorder, that experience can really help people get a grip on what otherwise might be something written in a book or on a PowerPoint slide. And I did an in-company one-day course a couple of years ago, and the venue that the business had booked, the people there had also done the one-day course. And I said to the catering manager, I said, "Oh, right, okay, well, if you've done the one-day course, it's going to be the same course as we're going to do today." And they were coming in and out with food and drinks throughout the day. And at the end of it, she said to me, "That was a lot more interactive than the course we did." And it made me realise that, you could go and do the training, and you could just do the PowerPoint presentation, and it would be death by PowerPoint. And so it's the background in terms of training skills. I've got a teaching qualification, and the research and other people's stories that I think brings the course to life.
Yeah, they've got to be engaging, haven't they? No one wants death by PowerPoint these days. So obviously the biggest challenge for most small businesses in recent months has been the pandemic. But outside of that, in the 3 years that you've been in business, what would you say has been your biggest challenge that you've had to face?
I mean, the pandemic is definitely the biggest one, because things were going along quite nicely, and the business had become profitable, and last year was going to be the year that I thought it would really start to take off, and then the pandemic did hit. So that really has been the biggest thing. I suppose the other thing is for me is trying to differentiate myself from other people that are essentially, on the face of it, teaching the same course. So I'm confident that I am skilled at what I do, but why should people come and see me? And so getting that message across has been the biggest challenge, I would say. And yes, and as time goes by, Mental Health First Aid England, God love them, are still training trainers. And I can see the reason why, because if mental health first aid does become mandatory in the workplace, there'll be like huge numbers of people that require training. So there will need to be a lot of trainers. But yeah, but just standing out from the crowd has probably been the biggest single challenge.
Okay, going back on what we touched on earlier about mental health awareness becoming more into the fore in recent years. Do you think that's because more celebrities, people in the public eye, are acknowledging that they've got mental health? I think Stephen Fry comes to mind, for example. A few years ago, talked about the issues that he's faced in his life. Did you think that's helping when celebrities make it a little bit? I don't know what the word is. A little bit more normal for you to be suffering from sort of mental health issues, because it's not an abnormality, is it? It is an illness. It is something that you've got no control over. So did you think that helped when celebrities come out, as it were?
Yeah, it's interesting, because if someone breaks their leg, then we like broken legs. We like the fact that we can see a plaster cast. We like the fact that kind of validates why that they're ill. It's a little bit more difficult with things that you can't see, like pain or mental illness. And I think sometimes people, and I've certainly seen it on social media, people suggesting that some celebrities are jumping on the mental health bandwagon.
All right. Okay.
But I think it is useful, and members of the royal family, for example, very high profile. Are really useful. People like Stephen Fry. The BBC has done a lot of very good documentaries, and again, it's around about people's lived experience, which obviously I love. But for example, local hero here, Nadia Hussain, did a documentary about anxiety. And again, it's a real eye-opener for a lot of people, because if you've never experienced anxiety or depression to that extent, how are you meant to know what it feels like? And I think for a lot of people, when they learn about depression, for example, the fact that people physically can't get out of bed is a bit shocking. It's like, well, it's you feel low, it's in your head. Why can't you physically get out of bed? But there's a real physicality to a lot of mental illness that I think surprises a lot of people. And so hearing about those stories, I think, are useful. And also, to a certain extent, people like Caroline Flack, bless her, it's when somebody famous takes their life. Again, unfortunately, suicide is worryingly common at the moment, and I'm sure the figures are only going to get worse as we realise the impact of that the pandemic has had on people's mental health. But lots of people won't know someone that close, and I think when someone they see on the TV and feel like they know, when something like that happens, like they take their own life, like Robin Williams or people like that, then it really does kind of like bring it home to them.
Yeah.
And I think it also helps them realise that it doesn't matter if you're sort of rich and famous and talented, and it looks like you have like the perfect life. Mental illness doesn't care, and it can affect anyone at any time. Which again, it just helps get that message across.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you're kindly going to give us a little bit of learning from your repertoire. So I'm going to put you on solo camera now, and just sort of really hand over to you, and see you back here in 3 or 4 minutes. So the floor is yours, AJ.
Thank you. So one of the biggest challenges to supporting mental health in the workplace is stigma. And one of the things that businesses can do to improve mental health and wellbeing in the workplace is to reduce the stigma around mental health. And if people are starting to struggle, then they seek help sooner. And the sooner that people seek help, the better, because then the quicker the recovery, the less time they have off work. And ACAS are now saying that presenteeism costs businesses twice as much as absenteeism. So rather than people taking time off work, they are struggling on with things like mental illness. And rather than taking a few weeks or months off and coming back firing on all 4 cylinders, they are spending months, maybe years, struggling at 80% efficiency, because they're not really able to fully focus because of what's going on. So if you can reduce stigma and if you can get people to seek help, then there are some big gains to be made. So one of the things you can do that is obviously by engaging in training. So either the half-day mental health awareness training, the one-day mental health first aid champion, or the 2-day mental health first aid course. Because it's a statement of intent. It's the fact that you are supporting well-being in the workplace, but you are investing in training and people that can spot the signs and signpost others when they need help. But also there are other things you can do to reduce the stigma. So Mental Health First Aid England have got a really good resources page. So if you go to Google and if you put in Mental Health First Aid England resources, it will come up with the Mental Health First Aid England resources page. And there are lots of free resources there that anyone can download and use. For example, posters around depression and anxiety. So we're used to seeing normal health and safety posters in the workplace. But when you start sticking up posters around mental health and well-being, then it just starts to drip feed the fact that it's okay to talk about these things. And there are lots of resources there. And there are other resources for employers, such as what is mental health first aid and how do employers engage with mental health first aid in the workplace. So use the resources and also embed mental health within your work practices. So for example, if you do a return to work with someone, ask about their mental health. It doesn't matter if they were off because they broke their leg, partly because being off with a broken leg can still have a negative impact on someone's well-being. But also, if you ask absolutely everybody about their mental health, then they don't feel stigmatized. They don't feel like they're being singled out. and it normalises mental health in the workplace and other processes as well. So employee appraisals, every appraisal just ask how they're doing at work, how's their mental health, how's their well-being, and again, it just normalises it in the workplace. So the more processes where you can make discussing mental health part of that day-to-day event, then the better it will be for everybody. And because they'll feel more comfortable about talking about mental health issues, then when they do start to struggle, they'll be able to talk to you and seek help sooner.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So one final thing, given your experience, if you were going to give one top tip for a small business owner out there, what would your top tip be to them?
It's very similar to what I just said. You know, it's embed mental health and well-being in the workplace. Just make it part of your everyday processes, like returns to works and appraisals. Definitely look at the mental health first aid resources page for Mental Health First Aid England, because the fact that you've got all these things that are free to download. Something I didn't mention in the 3 minutes was that there is a line managers resource. So again, it's just an online guide that is designed for line managers as to how to support mental health in the workplace, which you can write, you can contact Mental Health First Aid England and buy a book, but it's free as a PDF just to download. So just download it, have a read through. And if anybody has any questions, they're more than welcome to contact me. And like I say, I'll do the free half-hour sessions where it's really just sort of like 20 minutes of PowerPoint talking about mental health in the workplace and then answering their questions. And it's a good way of just starting that journey for companies that don't know how to support mental health and well-being.
Yeah, I've just posted the generic site there for anybody that's watching this, and we could put it in the comments on the social media platforms as well, just so people have got access to it.
Yes, and I think if you add a /resources to the end of that, that will take you to the right page. But like I say, if you just Google MHFA England resources, then you'll go straight there, and yeah, they're free.
Perfect. Anything else to say, AJ? Otherwise, your ordeal is done here.
It's not been an ordeal. It's been a pleasure. So thank you very much for that. I do appreciate being given the opportunity. I think what I would say is currently in the pandemic with the home working, it is putting a strain on a lot of people's mental health and well-being. So in terms of the individual, just remember that we all have a stress container, and we all have different size containers, but at the moment there's a lot of stress going into that container, and if it starts to overflow, you'll really struggle. The secret to managing your stress container is to open the tap like a little safety release valve, do the things that make you happy, and try and embed them into your processes every day. So whether that be fake commuting, so you get up in the morning and you do go for a cycle, you go for a walk before you start work, if it's having a bit of a decompress at the end of the day, if it's setting up your workspace so it's very distinct and separate. There are lots of useful resources online, but do be aware of that. And when you work with someone, you know, and you're looking out for mental health issues, change is the important thing. So if it was a meeting at work, someone who's normally very outgoing and bubbly might become very withdrawn and quiet. Why the change? And it would be nice to have that conversation. Now, when we're working remotely, it is more difficult. If you suddenly find that someone isn't replying to emails, if they're not turning up to Zoom calls, or they're turning up and they look like they're not taking care of themselves, then just ask the question. Because if you do it in a sensitive way, which is one of the things we discussed in the mental health courses, then it's rarely going to be received in a negative fashion, because people are just grateful that someone's noticed something and genuinely cares about them. And it's difficult to get a negative response or to give a negative response to someone who is genuinely concerned about your well-being.
Now, I'd reiterate that, you know, from in the networking scene, you know, a few faces have sort of like disappeared, and I think, you know, my message is, you know, reach out to those people. Just, you know, pick up the phone, drop them a line, you know, just check in with them. I know for some, you know, the online stuff doesn't work for them. That's fine. But even so, you know, I think it's useful to, you know, connect with those people just to make sure they're okay. And as you say, you know, my experience is that most people are happy for that, you know, that they appreciate you, that you're paying attention and, you know, care about them. I think that's what's been quite nice during this pandemic is, you know, little stories of cards being sent and, you know, gifts being sent and received and things like that. You know, I know I've partaken in that on both sides. You know, I've received cards and gifts, and I've sent stuff out there just to let people know that, you know, if they're having a shit time at the moment, that, you know, people are thinking of them and are supportive and will do whatever they can, you know, to help them through these times. So I think, yeah, I think reach out is the message, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and what you just described is a really nice way of doing it, because unfortunately we're pre-programmed not to give a genuine answer when someone asks how we are. Because if we were working together, Paul, and if we went into the office that morning and I said, "You right, Paul?" What would your response be?
Well, we will go, fine, yeah, fine, yeah,
Yeah,
not bad.
and to be fair, that's the socially acceptable response. Because if I say, "You're right, Paul," the one thing I do not want you to do is to tell me how you are, because that's not how we play the game in this country. It's just, you know, "Are you all right?" It's just another way of saying hello. And so, "You're right," it's like, "Yeah, fine," is the socially accepted response. But if you say, "Yes, I'm fine," and I say, "No, no, seriously, Paul, like, how are you doing?" then there's an intentionality there. And so it's like just reiterating that it's not just your normal "Hi, how are you?" Kind of conversation. It's you know, I'm concerned about your well-being, and I just want to make sure that you're doing okay. How are you coping at the moment?
Well, a few years ago, you know, I'm sure you've seen it, you know, someone told me the definition of fine was effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional, which is probably right. You know, fine is just the dismissive thing, isn't it? Or, you know, okay, or not too bad. And yeah, sometimes if you see something in somebody, you know, you need to sort of delve a little bit deep, you know, appropriately, and yeah, just that really, you know, just to make sure you're not encroaching on their space too much. But yeah, I think most people are appreciative of that, you know, helping hand or that helping conversation, or just letting them know they're not alone at the end of the day.
Yeah, because the other issue with everybody saying they're fine is it means that we think everybody's fine. So that when we start to struggle, we're a bit weird and a bit abnormal, because why am I feeling down and anxious when everybody else is fine? But you're right, they're not. It's just what they're saying, and it's the front they're putting up.
Yeah.
So breaking down that barrier, yeah, just talk to them, have the conversation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. AJ. Your work is done here. Thank you.
No, thank you. Have a good rest of the day.